It's Friday afternoon, and we're here to pretend that there's big news to talk about. Time for another episode of Connect This. Only it's the second episode in a row in which Doug is not able to join us at the start because of infrastructure. Doug was late to our previous show, I think, because of electricity going in and out, and he doesn't have the whole going in problem right now. No electricity in Western North Carolina. He is very wet, and we wish him the best as the hurricane moves through. I did text with him, and he's in high spirits as I think Travis might be having to eat out his entire fridge before it all goes bad. So I just had lunch with Travis, and I feel confident making food related jokes since I had said that we should go get this Thai food, and it's like really bad service, and he's like, I'll spend all day eating Thai food if you want. So we're set.
Or just hanging out.
Well, it looks like your service is going well too, Chris, as you keep cutting in
Am I blipping? What?
You were blipping for me, but
okay. Well, hopefully that'll stop. We've got two people that are familiar to the one of you that watches the show all of the time. We'll introduce them last, but we got Travis Carter, whose belly's full of Indian food. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. And I think the key thing we learned today is let's order mild next time. The medium for us upper Midwesterners was a little strong. So
yes. Tasty, but strong.
Travis,
Travis,
thank you for taking time, and you didn't leave for an important call from Washington, D.C. this time. So thank you.
It was Washington State this time.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for being there for the whole meal. It's usually when the check comes, guys, all of a sudden the president's calling Mitchell and he's got to go. So just heads up if you ever get invited out to dinner with him.
It might be a little late for the president to be calling me right now. Usually it's an earlier thing. Kim McKinley is from UTOPIA Fiber. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. But I need to know who paid for the meal since he didn't leave.
It's not even a question. There's no opportunity for me to ever pay for Travis.
Yes, I'm 100%, but I'm owed 2 chicken wings, but I like just keeping them there. Wasn't that in The Godfather? One day, Mr. Mitchell, I will call upon you.
Yeah.
For a favor. Yes. So he owes me.
We have Matt Larson from VistaBeam, and a person who comes on to remind us that we shouldn't talk about fiber only all the time alone without mentioning other technologies. Welcome, Matt.
Good to see you guys. And I just want to say I'm super jealous that you have Indian food where you're at, because we have about 30 Mexican restaurants, and I would happily trade 5 of them for one mid-level Indian restaurant just to have some more variety.
Yeah, I think about this sometimes. Like I could totally handle being in a rural area, except for the lack of food options. Even just like take out pizza, like just delivery and stuff. So yeah, I'm sure you have that, but in Scottsbluff. But I'm just saying, like, I love the food choices we have.
Yes, I'm jealous.
Sasha Meinrath?
Not jealous of your broadband. We're fine on that front. Food, yes.
We got Sasha Meinrath coming to us from State College, I think. Is that right?
Today, State College. Tomorrow, who knows? Yes.
Sasha is a big endowed chair professor person, but more importantly,
that's my
founder
official title, actually. Yes.
Yes. But the director of X Lab, which he created, and I would say heterodox thinker. Like, it's pretty damn annoying at times.
Oh, well, lovely. Then I'm doing it right.
And I'm really excited to jump into our first topic, but I'm going to delay it for 1 second while we do this quick peekaboo. This one's not a puzzle. It's just entertaining. Boom. This is where I think Matt reminds us that you rarely see an auger with wireless gear wrapped around it.
That looks expensive.
Yeah.
That's about 5 towers worth of wireless gear right there.
Travis, how do you react to that?
Well, I look at this thing. I mean, what do you guys think the green is? That's new to me. Is that interduct? And then
garden hose?
Yeah, bunch direct here. I don't know.
Maybe they just ran out of orange.
Yeah. Yeah, it almost seems staged. It's so much in one spot. Whoever built that network obviously had a location where it all came together. So
why does that guy look so happy, though? He actually has a smirk on his face when he's looking at that.
Maybe he works for a wireless provider.
Oh, that'll take a while to put back together.
Kim, have you ever seen anything that you have any, like horror photos in the office where like there's been a particularly bad hit in for the Utopia network?
I think we do. I think we have seen a few, but luckily, knock on wood, nothing that we have seen this year. So don't jinx us, Mr. Mitchell. Do not jinx us.
We have some good notes popping in from the chat. So welcome everyone in the chat. Please jump in with any sort of comments. I don't think we have to do any more explanation on this, but if anyone has anything else funny to say, they're welcome. So let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything. I think we're going to roll into Cox v. Rhode Island. And this is something where I'll admit, when this was fired across my email by someone who was like, you should talk about this on the show, I just assumed that I would be on the side of Rhode Island. And then when I looked into it, I was like, oh, this is more complicated. And I heard that all I knew is that Sasha had a fiery take on it. One of our colleagues at ILSR was on a call where Sasha was, and I was like, I'll bet Sasha's fiery take is like against Cox. And so we'll have him on and he and I will argue. But I think Sasha and I came to the same conclusion. I don't know, Sasha, do you want to share the facts or should I start to share them?
I mean, what I'll simply say is like Cox is pointing out the ugly truth. The inconvenient truth is that the systems and processes and protocols that we have set up to do broadband mapping are just ridiculously complicated to the point of being dysfunctional. And the sad reality is this is just a new take on an old process, because the first broadband mapping boondoggle where we wasted $350 million, this is exactly what we did wrong. And then the FCC and NTA both agreed, like, oh yeah, we need to simplify this. But this process is even more complicated than the first one that they rightfully said was too complicated. So Cox is simply saying like, yeah, it's so complicated we can't participate. And they're right. Like as an expert in broadband mapping, I opted my team out of the challenge process anywhere in the country because I was like, engaging with this thing is a fool's errand.
Now, if we step back for a second to make sure people are tracking, there was all this money that's going out. You know what? We're just going to pause here for a second. Travis, did you want to say anything about BEAD before we jump into this and I explain what's going on?
Oh, you want to have the count this early in the show? Okay,
let's get it done.
So I guess my question for the group is, how many people have we hooked up to BEAD now after 1,400 days?
And my response to that is, this is the "Are we there yet?" of Connect This.
Yeah.
Well, that
Zero.
is true.
My man Matt. Okay, so then we can roll right into that juicy Trump FCC 6 gigahertz that we're all loving. So we can get both of them out of the way right away then, huh, Mr.
All right. So the federal government wants to put $45 billion into rural broadband. But in order to do that, it wanted to know who doesn't have access. And so it developed maps because it had ignored decades of people like Sasha, me, Derek Turner, lots of other people saying that the FCC should have an accurate sense of where broadband is in the United States of America. And said, oh, no, now we suddenly have to do it quick. And they developed a super secret map with some really with a contractor that has a lot of history with working with the FCC, but I think saw a big payday and developed this proprietary map and made it hard for anyone to get access to. The federal government said the states have to use this data in order to figure out where their eligible locations are. And they basically have tried to update it with data from the public and other ISPs by having challenge processes, which are mandated, in which they try to fix it. When this is all done, we will have a bunch of eligible locations that we are more or less bound to use for the money the states have to distribute around broadband. And some of these locations are flawed in that some locations don't exist. It's a field and there's nothing in it, and it's an eligible location for a connection. I'm not saying like there's like a farmhouse nearby. Like there's just nothing there. There's no structure, and it's an eligible location. In other places, there are structures and they don't have service, but the map says that they do. There's all kinds of errors with it. What we're talking about today with Cox is this challenge process in Rhode Island, in which Cox is upset because Rhode Island is about to move forward with eligible locations, and some of those eligible locations are in areas that Cox says are well served. Cox says that it has attempted to participate in a challenge process, but it wasn't really able to. The state says that Cox has mostly ignored opportunities to get on the record about problems with the process. I frankly think both are accurate. And I'm trying to remember if that's all of the relevant facts, but and so Cox would like to see Rhode Island, which is a rather connected state, but still has significant gaps, I have no doubt. But Cox would like to see Rhode Island focus on using the money from the federal government to subsidize Cox's service to low-income households. The state says we can't do that. Cox would like to see the state go back and do things over again that would basically make Rhode Island out of compliance with NTIA's procedures for how fast they want to move forward. And so there's a big mess. And then the last thing I'll say on behalf of Doug, who's out there wishing he was with us right now, is that this is the first of many lawsuits that we are likely to see that are around this or similar processes. Sasha, you look like you're the most ready to dive in, and then Kim.
Oh my gosh. I mean, where to even begin? I think this process was laid out extremely well by Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Where basically aliens go and bulldoze Earth. And, basically the protagonist is like, I object. And they're like, well, you had your chance to object. And then they go through like a chapter of explaining the complex, irrational, absurdist process of objecting. And NTA was like, hold my beer because we can do this even more complicated. And that's what's been done. Because one of the key elements here is, let's say you're a human living in a community that's not served, and the map says you're served. And I'm like, oh, I don't have it at my house. Let me go in and do a challenge. Well, you're actually forbidden as the person affected from doing a challenge. It has to go through this labyrinthian process through an NGO that's not you. And you can contrast this with what NTA did to solve this problem in tribal areas where they allowed tribes to simply self-certify. NTA could do that. They could choose to just be like, you know what, our maps are such a mess. If you send in an affidavit saying, here's what on the ground reality looks like, we will defer to that. But that appears to be not what they're doing. And so they are chasing this ever receding goal of an accurate and precise map using bad data to start with and terrible processes of fixing these data all the way through.
Kim.
I was just going to ask, Mr. Mitchell, are you really surprised that the federal government made something that was this complex? I mean, really? I mean, that's what they really thrive on. I have my best friend just works for the federal government, and she had to take a new job within the federal government. And I just saw how she had to accept the job, and it was complex. I mean, the government thrives on making everything a bureaucracy and paperwork and overly complicated. And I'm beginning to believe, as a person who works for government, that they just like to make things complicated for the sake of making things complicated. I don't even think it's intentional. I just don't think they know how to not do it anyway other than this, to be honest with you.
If y'all are going to force me to take that side, I will take it reluctantly. Jennifer Palka's book, Recoding America, I highly recommend. There are ways to try to reform this. The federal government does a number of things well. It's just that when it does things badly, we all notice, and it's really frustrating when it's something this important.
I would also push back just a little bit, which is say it wasn't the government alone that did this. ISPs were in there mucking around in order to create a complexity that hid their digital redlining.
Well, that's facts. And they're capitalizing off. They know that the government can't.
Although,
really fight them too. This
is where I would also just very briefly, because I want to make sure we give a chance for Matt to talk and Travis to not talk. When you say ISPs, like there are a lot of the big ISPs. Most of them have engaged in lobbying and lying in order to prevent accurate data from coming out. Among smaller ISPs, of whom there's well over 1,000, most of them are happy to submit accurate data. Every now and then we find someone that's gleefully lying publicly, but it is a small number of very large ISPs that have created this problem, I think, and made it harder. Matt?
The whole thing, it's very asymmetric. So a bigger company has the ability to either A, submit a whole bunch of challenges easily that are going to be difficult to respond to, or B, has the team that can go out and kind of target places where they can try to respond to it. And I can give you an example. In Wyoming, Charter submitted challenges against every fixed wireless served location to show that as being unserved. So we went back and we served these areas. We actually got money in 2020 from CARES Act to build out 100 down, 20 up stuff that meets the requirement of law. And they didn't accept our challenge. And when we asked, okay, what do we need to do to substantiate that? And the burden of proof to substantiate and respond to these challenges was ridiculous. We literally had to provide the equivalent of a fully engineered showing what antennas are on both sides and terrain. It was ridiculous. Now, we turned in a set of information that came out of the system that we use to generate coverage, which was very widely accepted within our industry as being acceptable to show where you can offer service. It's the basis of our service qualification tool. And they rejected it. So it's not enough information. And at that point, it's just like, well, we submitted it and that's what you're going to get. Take the challenge, don't take the challenge. I don't care at this point. Now, I did talk to a couple of other ISPs that said, you know what, they were super strategic about it. They said, well, there's some areas we don't want competition, so we're going to substantiate it. And they spent the time to do it. But man, I am not in this business to fill out paperwork. I'm in this business to serve people. And at a certain point, you just have to kind of go on down the road. And I think that's part of what's going on here. Is a bigger company can go out and submit a challenge and, you know, get more locations put on or taken off or whatever. And a lot of the smaller companies just aren't going to have the resources to respond very well. And it's very obvious the state broadband offices, 90% of them do not have the capacity to really judge this very well anyway. So we have giant binders full of, or the digital equivalent of giant binders full of data that nobody can comprehend.
Well, isn't that doesn't that go to the point that we think a lot of this money is going to the big guys because the big guys are the only ones who can really even have the time or resources to get through any of this paperwork?
That is a very significant part of the reason that I believe that more than half of the money will go to those big companies. Yes.
More than half. Give us a percentage, Chris. Are we talking
I think it was in that
51%?
55 to 65 range before. I think I'm gonna hold on that. I don't know if Rye's been writing these down or if we're just letting them go out into the ether. But
if the capital project fund is any indicator, in Pennsylvania, over 2/3 of the funding went to just Comcast and Verizon of the entire grant portfolio.
Yeah, and we, Sasha, you and I worked on that. We had a sense of exactly how it worked. We saw that there were good submissions from others that did not get it. I mean, there is a issue that I've learned a lot about over the past 15 years, I would say, and I don't want to focus on this too much. We could come back to it another time, but that it is not enough to have a good idea of how things should be. You have to figure out how to make it so. And the problem with NTIA is they would really like to see a bunch of stuff happen, and they haven't recognized that there is no path to making it work, and that the further you try to make everything perfect, the less you make it that anyone can actually even get out the other end. And I think that's what we're seeing. That's why Sasha's so inflamed right now. And what I want to talk about is a little bit of what Sasha said about the technical issue around what Cox would have to do to meet the requirements of the state of Rhode Island, which has got them from NTIA largely. But first, Travis, is there anything you want to say about the initial salvo of this?
Yeah, we did not incorporate a holistic approach to this. And if we would have used a holistic approach, with that holistic approach, and we would have been able to solve this problem, Mr. Mitchell.
For those of you who didn't see it, I only know about this because Travis texted me. Apparently, Kamala, in a response to a question about broadband, used the word holistic more than all the other words in the sentence combined.
So I'm trying to be governmenty, but no, honestly, Matt's spot on. Here's the thing. If you're a big company, you can put a staff of 30, 40 people on this, and they can sit and navigate all the paperwork. Matt and I don't have people, Kim probably doesn't, Sasha, to navigate through this. So why would you even bother? And then you got to have the people ready to get when you get audited, because of course they're going to come audit you and make sure. And if you did anything wrong, now you're in trouble. And then they have another 3-letter agency that comes in and wastes all your time. It's just why would anyone do it?
Well,
Yeah,
I think that that's a good point, especially when interest rates are falling right now, that you're going to see people start building again and not worry about this necessarily the money. Where I think a lot of holdouts were when the interest rates were a little bit higher, they were holding out for this bead money in more ways than we're seeing today. But yeah, no, I go for it, Chris. We're all looking for your explanation to defend all of this because you're the only one on the other side, it seems.
Oh no, I can't defend all this entirely. What I would say is that there's several observations I would like to make, but I'm not going to make them all. Don't worry. Stay tuned. Don't run away. I think the state of Rhode Island is in the right place. The state of Rhode Island got a grant from the American Rescue and Recovery Act, and they basically gave it to Cox because Cox is like the only cable company in town. It is the major internet provider for the state, and it does an okay job. And it's really terrible on Aquidneck Island, as best I could tell, which is where a lot of people live in Rhode Island. But they just gave it over to them. And like, I mean, if you look at like the woman, what's her name, who runs who runs NTIA, the Department of Commerce. What's her name? Former governor.
Lena Cohn.
No,
no, sorry.
Sasha, I think you had it, but I talked over you.
Raimondo?
Yeah, Gina Raimondo. She came out of Rhode Island, and what was the first thing I learned about her? That she was really friendly with Cox. It really made me worry. But like that was the nature of Rhode Island. It worked with Cox. Now it looks to me like Rhode Island has recognized that Cox is not going to actually solve their problems, and they're trying to figure out how to have a system in which they try to get money to others that will actually invest in ways that will benefit the people that have been left behind. But how they're going about doing it is difficult because NTIA has put a pair of handcuffs on them, and so now, Sasha, you can disagree. Go ahead and tell me that I'm wrong. But like, Cox, in order to prove that the state data is wrong, Cox is supposed to submit simultaneous speed tests of like 75% of its customers, I believe, chosen randomly within these areas.
Yes.
Only that is not something that is actually physically possible. They say, I mean, this is based on Cox's numbers, which could be an exaggeration or something, but Cox has filed legally that like 30% of their customers don't have a Cox cable modem, and Cox is not able to do an automated speed test on them. And so like you just have the situation in which I think Cox should be ruled out because I think it's a company that doesn't do a good job of meeting the needs for the audience that this money is intended for. But at the same time, you have to have a process that could work.
Yeah, well, so the irony here is it's the ISPs, the mega ISPs, that fought to create a complicated system that is now ensnared themselves. I mean, what NTA has done wrong is they didn't put scientific research community in charge of this process. They attempted to split the baby between like science and lobbyist proclivities. And so they've ended up with this. And this is what happened with the Measuring Broadband America process. This is what happened with the original National Broadband Plan again and again and again and again. It's the process that's broken. And that then is kind of metastasized through NTA being unwilling, right? They could, Assistant Secretary Davidson could allow for self-certification. They choose not to. And in fact, when you look at the original law, they say you can bring in additional data. We would encourage you to use additional data. And I'm like, so why is that there if we can't use additional data? I don't understand. This is a disaster that has, in essence, incompetency layered upon incompetency. The incompetency of bad methodology also then being put through a system where people are unwilling to tell ISPs, like, here's what you're going to do. And the thing is, we could make an accurate and precise map for almost zero public outlay tomorrow with a very, very simple process. We tell ISPs, give us whatever your coverage is, and we will accept it. However, if anyone that you claim to serve is unserved, after 30 days, we'll just charge you $10,000 fine a day. Just that.
I would put a slightly different safeguard in as safe harbor for smaller companies that would bankrupt. But your point is well received by me.
Small companies know their footprint. Like I work with small ISPs.
I don't think it. Yes, but that's very depending on the maps. I would agree with you, Sasha, but there are mistakes that happen even with small companies, not intentionally, but yes, because maps can get even a little finicky for small companies because, like, what is business versus residential for us, and how does it get categorized can be totally two different things when it goes into some of these maps, which we got caught up in when it happened, and we immediately found out and acknowledged our mistake, but those mistakes can happen though. I don't want to overly categorize that small companies are all perfect either.
What I find interesting is that the reason we have such a complicated process, I'll use Matt's network as an example, because you serve so many areas which are rural, which is where we're supposed to be directing a lot of this money. The point of this whole process is to make sure that a good provider like Matt, who's providing service in these areas, doesn't have new money coming in when that money should be directed to areas that need it more. And despite having this complicated process that very few can navigate, it looks like we're still going to have money coming in to compete with Matt. I mean, that's the part that just drives me the most nuts. And I will admit, I think it is more the left that has this sense of like, we're going to like over engineer this solution. It's the same branch of thinking that back in 1945 thought that you could centrally engineer an entire economy and figure out how much corn to grow and how much bread to make and everything else. There needs to be more of a respect for decentralized knowledge, and that is not something that we see out of the federal government on this program. But we did it with the American Rescue Plan Act, where you put that money out there and the states had broad leeway on how to use it, and the Capital Projects Fund. I feel like if we are smart over the next 5-10 years, we will recognize that that is a far superior method of distributing money. Yeah, now, before I go any further,
I wish we would collect the baseline data now so we could actually empirically derive what's successful and not, right? Which again was another failing of BTOP that we acknowledged and said, oh yeah, we should have actually measured impact. That would have been a good thing to have for the first $7 billion we spent, right? Like, we didn't. And then here we are, hopefully in the last 12 to 18 months before the money actually goes out the door, like it would be good to have good baseline data so that we can actually see what the impact is. And yet we don't.
What I would like to do now is to ask Travis if you would like to make fun of me somehow for Sasha using the word proclivity.
I had to Google that word, because of my 9 days of college, but I'm still stuck with what Matt brought up earlier, and I wholeheartedly agree. Why are we talking about Rhode Island? Isn't that like the size of my yard or something?
It's the first lawsuit. Well, it's a good point.
How does not everybody in Rhode Island have high-speed internet already?
So there's a couple of things. One is I've spent a little bit of time on Aquidneck Island, which is where Newport is, and Middletown, I think, and there's one other one. And I happened to be there during a storm, and the electricity system just stopped working because it was like there was lightning occasionally. I don't know what caused it. The infrastructure is fairly poor. Cox's system works some of the time and doesn't work other times, regardless of the electrical system. And so there are areas where you could get service from Cox where it's unreliable or it's just not performing up to speed. I mean, you know how it is with HFC systems. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong if they're not properly maintained. In Rhode Island, if you don't want Cox, what are you gonna do? Starlink? I don't know. Like, there's nothing else really. And so, so there's areas that need investment.
And maybe this isn't the right forum. Maybe it's over another lunch. But why is North Dakota so connected and little tiny Rhode Island?
I have a paper about that, but I'll let Matt.
I have the answer.
It has nothing. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. I'd love to know.
North Dakota has an infrastructure bank. They took some of their natural resources. They created an infrastructure bank. And ISPs and phone companies have been able to borrow from that infrastructure bank to go out and build fiber and to build infrastructure. If we had an infrastructure bank, a national infrastructure bank, then this would not be near as much of a problem. The biggest issue I have with trying to do more is right now, my financial capability is stuck at what I'm willing to personally guarantee. Mm-hmm. So if we had infrastructure banks that use the infrastructure as part of the security, then we would have way, way more infrastructure built out. Especially because the other thing you could do is, if the infrastructure security, part of the problem I have is my local bank does not see any value in fiber or even our wireless stuff. So we have to find a lender that's willing to lend on cash flow. So
why do you think that is, Matt? What is their reasoning behind that?
Because what are they going to do if I fail? They're going to try and sell that fiber network. They have no idea. They know how to deal with real estate and tractors and stuff like that. So if we had an infrastructure bank that if somebody defaulted, then you have an entire portfolio of other borrowers that are doing the same thing that you could go to say, all right, this guy defaulted. Here's a neighbor. Are you willing to take this over or work out some kind of a deal so somebody else could take it over? It's almost zero risk. In fact, it would probably net make money because they could charge some interest on it. That's what we should be doing, not BEAD. BEAD needs to be taken out behind the woodshed and put out of its misery. BEAD needs the old Yeller treatment.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. I would like to add on to that a little bit and say that if we had an infrastructure bank, but we didn't change the structure of the ISPs, we would still have, it would be a long road. The other thing that North Dakota has is like 15 co-ops and 2 independent for-profit companies that wanted to take advantage of that infrastructure bank, that bought exchanges from the national ILEC. I think it was US West at the time. And a bunch of those exchanges were bought by those local companies, some of them co-ops, some of them not, with infrastructure bank support. And they built out and they've made these massive investments because they are investing in their communities. They're not trying to figure out how to retire in Miami. So I think, that's the other part of it, I think, is that like, if we had an infrastructure bank in more places, we would also have to figure out how to nurture the right entrepreneurs to take advantage of it.
Yeah, you'd have to put some caps on it per project.
I was going to wonder, what are some of the parameters for an infrastructure bank that people have today? Like, what is out there from, like, can anybody get like lend from an infrastructure bank, or does it have some parameters around it? Like, Matt, you were kind of going down that pathway. This
may be a good time to just hold this over to bring in someone who's more of a Matt, if you have an answer to that, I don't want to silence you, but I'll just also say, like, I'd like to bring in someone who has spent a lot of time working on this.
I would love to hear more about it too. I mean, this is something I brought this up at an economic development conference in Nebraska about 15 years ago. And the governor was like, well, I don't think the banks would like that. And the banks were like, no, we'd love something like that because we're not familiar with those kind of assets. And that's, infrastructure is not the sort of thing that, your regular private bank is going to loan money on. They'll finance a company if they've got like a super strong balance sheet, but they aren't going to do the same thing for a smaller company. So that if the more we could do something like that, the better. And I agree. You're right. Part of it is that you had local phone companies and cooperatives out there. But I think the other side of it would be to open it up so you don't have just them that qualify for it. Because the other side of that is, you hear RUS has all these programs to try and build out broadband. But for the longest time, they would only loan to certain entities. They would only loan to this telephone company. And there was a telephone company that had a subsidiary that served part of my area. And I couldn't borrow in any of this area because we were a competing borrower. So you'd have to figure out how to structure it so it was going to be more accessible to the entities that are going to go out and be more innovative and have a proclivity for building out broadband.
The one thing I would also note is that I think if there was one co-op in the state of North Dakota, it wouldn't have done that. It's not just that there was a co-op; it's that there were locally rooted co-ops that had a sense of what their local regions needed, and they also could then cooperate together. And I just say that in part because SaskTel is less dense than North Dakota. But SaskTel, a publicly owned entity, also did not see a reason to invest in better networks throughout a lot of this time period.
How long has that bank been in process, or how long has it been out there?
It's like 100 years now. It was a progressive era fix. North Dakota has a bunch of really interesting stuff that is done that have really rooted a lot of power in local communities.
You know what? 99.4 episodes, and this is the absolute best idea I've heard. Because Matt's spot on. Matt probably deals like I do. You have to very tight leverage profile you have to stay within. Very few banks will do cash flow lending. I had a personal guarantee for 27 years on every dollar that was borrowed in our business. And once you hit your leverage profile, you are done. And so even the lunch we had today, Chris, when the person was talking about starting up a bit, what's the issue? Capital.
Mm-hmm.
Capital. It's always capital. And the feds, with their holistic approach, print all this money and they give it to the big companies. And it will not be 57%. It will be 97% that goes to the big corporations. And my prediction is, just like a lot of these other bills that pass with all this money, you won't see a difference hardly at all. And if a state like Rhode Island, that's literally the size of one county in Nebraska, this problem should not even be a problem for Rhode Island. So who's ever run in Rhode Island, shame on you guys.
Sasha, you had one last comment.
Yeah, I mean, just, this is going to further this digital divide across states, right? The states that have mechanisms to hit this 25% capital match for BEAD, well, they're going to have a lot more independents that are actually applying for the BEAD funds. And the states like Pennsylvania that have nothing, like, how the hell is somebody going to come up with a 25% match for tens of millions of dollar infrastructure build unless you're already this mega incumbent? And that to me points to a real failure on the part of not just my state, but like the country in terms of the total lack of broadband strategy. We see who has done better, and then we ignore any sort of assessment to say, what did they do right? And thus we have BEAD in the face of overwhelming evidence that we could do this better on so many different levels. We ignore using any form of like empirical or independent assessment to figure out what are efficacious tactics in favor of this thing that we're all in vociferous agreement sucks.
Okay, so exit poll. Let's go back. Alternate history. The FCC gets $45 billion to distribute to fix the problem. Are we angrier today, or are we happier today? Sasha,
Angrier.
I think it's irrelevant which agency it's in. If you have a lack of
fail the poll fail.
Because I have the false dichotomy and that's it.
Sasha has half a dozen on one and 6 on the other. Matt, more or less happy with FCC doing it?
Man, I'm gonna have to lean FCC direction just a little bit because they've actually gotten some money distributed. NTI hasn't.
Travis,
could it be worse? I don't know.
I think it could be worse. I'm with Kim.
My question, could they claw it back and cancel BEAD?
Not anymore because it's been allocated to the states.
Okay.
They could, though. They could pass legislation.
Right. Okay.
Republicans have argued that that's what needs doing. So, yeah, I mean,
it's only imaginable if, I would say, the elections move incredibly strongly to the Republican Party in this next, and then all branches.
Except for one key factor here, which is the overwhelming super majority of money is going to go to Republican districts.
Yeah, but this has always been Democrats spending tax dollars in Republican areas, and no one's ever noticed this except for a few people. I think it's a little bit peculiar, but so it goes. Cox, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this because I want to get to some other topics, but Cox is doing a major service for all ISPs, I think, with this whole thing that you can't really find written about anywhere, but we talked briefly about it. I think it was the Fourth Circuit in a decision basically agreed that Cox could be liable for a significant amount of money because it did not kick people offline who were infringing on music copyrights. And the Supreme Court will have to decide whether or not to hear this. And if the Supreme Court decides not to hear it, or if the Supreme Court agrees that ISPs should have to kick people offline if they are accused of infringing copyright. It's going to be very interesting. So Cox, I think, is sort of fighting the good fight on behalf of all ISPs on this issue. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Kim?
I just didn't know. Did you get like a Cox memo for this show, like today, of all the things that were happening with Cox? I mean,
Travis at lunch. Travis said, "I bet you can't say Cox more than 10 times on your show." And here I am.
Did you switch your position from Lumen to Cox, your stock, or what? Something's up here because you're really promoting this now.
I'd have to know someone at Cox to do that. It's not publicly traded. That's not a no. Oh, go ahead, Sasha.
No, just DMCA has been a mess since it was first passed, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, in terms of, in essence, requiring ISPs to surveil their own users, such that if you don't do that, then you somehow become liable for the copyright infringement of individual actions. This is this goes to a much larger problem of the overarching surveillance of users.
This is crazy.
Yeah, it is
the idea that the music industry can accuse like your daughter of infringing on a copyright and then your whole family loses internet service is nuts.
Well, yeah, and I have teaching a class that touches heavily on this, engage in wanton copyright utilization for educational purposes, which I have a fair use exemption for. How the hell will a copyright holder, or I should say their bot, know that in fact it's perfectly acceptable for me to use this particular copyrighted piece because I'm using it in my course? This,
Sasha,
to me,
I've never seen so many big words used in 2 sentences, like from the act to all of these big words that are being happened. Digital something, equity. I mean, it was the biggest thing I've ever heard. But keep going. Just needed to say
Yeah,
that.
PhD, but it's in statistics, not English. I mean, this is impressive.
It's basically we have a series of laws on the books that put ISPs in a bizarre place. They either have to surveil their users and report on them, or they don't, and therefore gain liability for being this intermediary. Now,
Wait, let me be clear about something, right? If my wife threatens the life of the president or a former president, we are punished, but I don't lose internet access.
Correct. Yes, and there's a whole section 230, right? That like if she posts this on a social media site, the social media site is not considered liable for a death threat against the president. There's a whole series of these intermediaries that are granted liability protection, but the quid pro quo is increasingly only if they turn and become the rats, right? They inform on what their users are up to. And this is where you see things like they're now actively surveilling where you go online through your DNS request and all this stuff. They're commercializing it on one side and they're handing it over, sometimes without a warrant, to law enforcement on the other. This is a real problem that, again, it's beyond what we should be talking about on this show, but is in essence coming to a head with this particular lawsuit. And yeah, I have no idea what the Supreme Court is going to do on this, frankly. It's a hot mess.
Do you have a reaction to this, Matt? Are you just sitting there saying like, I got to find a new business? What's your reaction?
Man, the best thing you do is just kind of stay under the radar. And, when law enforcement has a request, comply with it. The DMCA stuff, man, I could have, entire forests would come from the printouts I used to do back in the day when those things would come in. It's just one of those deals that I think is used to help prop up copyright stuff to like show that it's more valuable than it actually is. And, you have a borderline unenforceable mandate. So it would make sense if there was something that actually did make sense, more to do with piracy, especially something that can show actual financial harm.
We think that the Supreme Court's going to take it.
So the issue is in part that the Supreme Court is taking so few cases now. I feel like I would just say 50-50, which is to say I have no idea. I mean, the Supreme Court's weighing through like probably hundreds of court cases that are like this, that have an impact that it probably should take, where there's some kind of disagreement among the circuits. But they only take like 55 cases a year now. I mean, they keep shrinking the number of cases they take. I'm talking about this. Y'all are listening on next week on Broadband Bits, where for those of you that go way back, I'll see if I see a light in Travis's eyes. You remember Jamie Thomas? You remember Comcast and BitTorrent and the reset TCP? We talk a little bit about some of that. I talk with Professor Alfred Yen from Boston College, who's focused on this a little bit. And we talk about this for a good 35, 40 minutes or so. So if you're interested to know more, Broadband Bits. And if you're not interested, just try to fool someone else into listening to it. I want to talk about tech a little bit. New episodes are out on Tuesdays. So, Matt, you've been putting up some new millimeter wave stuff, and you have also been building fiber. And so, when I said, "Hey, you want to come on the show?" you said, "Yeah, let's talk about this a little bit." So, what's going on?
Yeah, so we won about $9.3 million worth of grants from the state of Nebraska and capital project fund related projects. And that's been terrifying. It was all fiber. We'd hired some grant writers and they said, "How aggressive do you want to be?" And I was like, go for it. And we thought we might get a couple million, and it turned out to be a lot more. Now, of course, we got a 30% match. And but the goal is we're going to try and get about 200 miles worth of fiber built to get all this stuff done.
Can you do you know offhand the average number of prem per mile that will go past?
It's very low.
Is it like lower than
maybe
5? I mean, is it really, really low? Okay.
4 or 5. The budget number we put in, I think, was 82,000 a mile to do underground. And some of the locations I think most of the locations we were looking at were north of 45,000 a location. Now, hopefully we come in less than that. But as a business person, it's moderately terrifying, because even with a 30% match, we're still talking about, if we maxed out, the maximum upper side of the budget, we're talking about putting out $10,000 per location to get fiber built to some of these out of our pocket, on top of the grant money, which is moderately terrifying. So
I want to let you come back to finish that thought, but I want to say, I think that means that your costs are like 80% that of Travis's, but your passings are you have 1% of the people that come out.
Yeah. And the only way to really make it work is to at least, kind of like one of our grants was a bunch of locations outside of a town where Charter didn't build their fiber out. So, we are going to build the town out. So this kind of helps make the business plan for building the entire town out work. But a lot of it is messy. I know one thing we're finding out, we were hoping to do aerial. And as we started talking with more of the rural electric cooperatives, we're finding that aerial is really not very good.
The poles aren't ready for it?
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of different things. It's not just the poles. Some of it's the weather risk. So one of the electric co-ops here had to replace 2,000 poles last winter after an ice storm. So they're trying to figure out how to go underground themselves.
Is there any way to make poles that are ice resistant? I mean, that might be a dumb question.
You need stronger poles. The problem is the weight, I think a side loading effectively, they snap, right?
Yeah, they get loaded up with ice, and then when you combine that with 100-mile-an-hour winds, the
ice is on the lines, and so that's putting tension on the poles. That's knocking them over, I think.
Anyway, it creates havoc. So we're finding there's a few places where we're probably going to do some little bits and pieces of aerial where it makes sense, a long spur that it's on the side of a canyon or something like that. So we'll put it on there because we don't want to try and go underground through rock. And there's, some little developments in town. It's not as big of a deal to go overhead. We're doing that as much as we can. However, we did find one town where we got a grant to build a town about 600 homes. And we went in assuming we could do aerial because the town owned the poles, but Nebraska Public Power manages the poles for them. And when they started running it through their filter after like 4 or 5 months waiting for them to get it done, basically it was like, nope, you can't, because it'll overload the poles. So we ended up having to go underground. And that was the bad news. The good news was we found a contractor that could do the underground for almost the same cost as what we were going to pay for aerial. So we're doing that. But really the thing is, what we're finding, and I know you guys are big advocates of rural electrics doing fiber using their poles, but pole condition, weather risk. The other thing is the length between poles. Out here, we have a lot of 300-foot spans. The amount of droop you've got out there starts to get dangerously close into, somebody with a lifted pickup truck and some stacks might take it out. We also have tractors. You've got poles at the edge of a field, and you've got tractors that are like 18, 19 foot tall when they put their implements up. So one of the cooperatives said, you can go on our poles, but you have to clear it 25 feet. And our stuff's at 22 feet, and there needs to be 2 foot of clearance. So you're SOL. So that has been kind of a big illustration of how difficult going aerial and taking that low cost angle is going to be. So I think that's one pretty big consideration as we talk about doing this. Anyway, we are going very deep to try and get to as many rural customers as we can, but it's going to take a lot of supplementing to make it anywhere near economically viable, even with 75% of it being paid for.
Yeah, if I had to guess, if the electric co-op was doing it, I would guess they would probably plow it in. We're seeing a lot of that in rural areas, I think.
They might. We do have a couple of places where we're doing it. We're actually having the rural electric we're going to have them put the stuff on the pole, which I love doing that, because then they're they're responsible if something breaks. They're the ones that will go out and fix it, and they're going to follow their standards, and they don't have to worry about, us bringing in some clowns from out of state that don't really know what they're doing, like some other bigger companies that Chris owns stock in have done.
I just want y'all to know, I'm building a new garage. I have no more lumen stock, so we can keep joking about it, but that money's in the garage now.
Okay, good.
You
good
sold
plan.
a losing stock. Congratulations,
no, it popped enough that I was like, I'm out. I couldn't take the heartburn anymore.
So I'm still seeing, this is interesting that you're seeing this, Matt, because I'm still seeing a lot of people still going aerial. Do you just think it's specific to where you are, or do you think this is going to be a trend throughout the country soon?
Oh, I think if you're in a town situation, you have different risks. There you have the dump truck risk, and you have less of the tractor gun owners using MTUs as target practice. So that's a different deal. So I think aerial is still going to be very popular in towns, where you have a little bit more density. If you can go down a block and pass 20 homes, aerial makes a ton of sense. If you have to go a mile and there's only going to be 1 or 2 drops on that mile, it's like, you stick a plow in the ground. If it's soft dirt, then just do it. So that's what we're finding.
Before we run out of time, I don't want you to get in trouble with your wireless friends, for not talking about wireless on this show while you're here with us. You're excited about some new gear that's 2 gigabit by 2 gigabit.
Yeah. So millimeter wave gear has been around for a while. We've deployed some of the Cambium product and some of the Ubiquity product, and even some of the MikroTik stuff here and there. And it was always kind of had this thing of, you can do 600-700 meg, but it's like really short range, or has some kind of complexity issues. And we've got some new stuff we're working with. I'm pretty satisfied with how it's working so far. So, and we're actually doing 3 different kinds of millimeter wave deployment. For those of you that aren't familiar with wireless, millimeter wave is very high frequency, but it doesn't go very far, but it has a huge amount of capacity. So we use Ciclu millimeter wave for backhauls. It's 10 gig of capacity.
What does not very far mean?
So Ciclu in a point-to-point configuration, we can go like 5-6 miles with it. So we use that, like we get a fiber feed in, and then we'll feed multiple towers. We might have 2-3 hops of Ciclu to feed other towers, that sort of thing. So then there's the last mile, which is where we're going from the tower to the actual customer. And that's where we've always had kind of this deal of, you want to serve as many customers as you can off of a tower, which that makes you want to have more, a wider range. So millimeter wave was not very popular because, at the first stuff was typically about a half a mile or so, if you were lucky. And then there were like the mesh configuration. So the Cambium has kind of a mesh type one where you can put it on somebody's house. And we found some places where we're using the Cambium for that. Ubiquity's product it's a Ubiquity product. It works most of the time, but it's kind of, they have questionable software at times, and it doesn't always do exactly what you want it to. But we've tried this new stuff, Tachyon, which I had not heard of until March of this year. But we put some up starting in July, and it just kind of blew me away. So they've got, if you use the right sector and customer premise antenna combination, you can get out to about a mile, which is, that's pretty good for millimeter wave. It is line of sight. So you do have to have line of sight. But where it really gets interesting is it does 2.2 gig both directions. And the cost per home passed is about $10 a home. So my house right now, I'm running off of it right now. I can run 2.5 gig speed tests, and the sector and everything to the radio that went on the tower, I think was like $400. And the one that went on my house was $300, and it plugged into an existing tower. So I can basically get faster speeds on that Tachyon than I can get from USI Fiber connection that used to be at my house, because they only sell 1 gig because they have not upgraded XGS PON. So what I think is interesting is to look at a blended approach of putting out, we'll put fiber in places where it makes sense. If we can get government funding and we've got the right amount of density and the financials on it work, put fiber in. But you're talking $1,000 to $1,200 a passing, even in town situations, just to pass the home. Then the Tirana gear, we've been deploying some of the 6 gig. I think I posted on LinkedIn. We're seeing near gigabit speed tests on that. Typically 500 meg is a lot more doable, but the Tirana can go through trees. It covers 8 to 10 mile radius around the tower. So that's out there, but Tirana, you're looking at, probably $100 a home passed, and probably, $1,000, $1,200 after you include the truck roll to go put somebody on with that. Well, and there's the Tachyon, which is super low cost. It's like $300 for the radio. So we can go in and do that. And what I'm looking at is all of a sudden, all these areas that I'd written off where there's already fiber, and it's like, I'm not going to go build out in this area with fiber, but I can put this Tachyon stuff up, and I can offer faster speeds than the fiber provider. And if I get 5% of the market, I'm wildly profitable. Now I'm going back into those areas to try and see if we can start taking customers back from the fiber carriers.
Can you maintain somewhat uniform pricing despite having these wildly different costs depending on the system? I mean, it's all transparent to the user ultimately, and there's some different speeds that might be available. But how do you handle that with so many different technologies?
We have the same pricing. We basically have the value package, the middle package, and the fastest package. And the prices stay the same. The speeds vary according to what technology is available there.
And so if you have someone on the value package, you're losing money on them with Tirana, I'm guessing.
It's close. But
okay.
Our ARPU right now is about $72 if you take everything and average it out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a $50 package with Tirana, not particularly profitable. Yeah, that's marginal. But a $50 package on a Tachyon, where it's a $300 radio, that makes its money back pretty quickly. And the other side of it is, if fiber, you really have to look at it with a long window point of view. I'm sure Travis would confirm this, but fiber looks great 5 to 7 years out, or if you want to sell your operation, but the first 5 years is nothing but pain and suffering financially.
Yeah, the interesting statement in there, I think, that we've never really talked about is that ARPU, because we're at 67, Matt's at 72. If Matt was at 76, just that little $4, $5 shift on your financials is exponential improvement in your borrowing ability and your EBITDA. It's amazing how we talk about $1 or $2 per subscriber, how big a difference it makes. So, and with Matt's idea, I mean, I'm a real fan, I'm more of a fan of wireless or fiber attached wireless, kind of the combo where I run into a problem. Like, we run a lot of Ciclu here in Minneapolis. I think we've got 110 gig Ciclu links. Every time the weather comes through, we drop a packet or two and I get a 1-star review. So it's just really how sensitive things are today. So, you just want to be a little careful that you've got absolute line of sight. Your antennas are perfectly aligned. And I think it's a good solution. But,
yeah, I mean, it's not for the weak of stomach or faint of heart. Wireless is one of those deals. Like, if you want everything to be 100% solid, you probably have to go out and spend the money to do it. But the other side of it, I think, that we're seeing, and I think overall we've seen a very huge surge in popularity with fixed wireless. I know most of that's driven by Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, but yeah, there are a lot of people out there that $50 a month, as long as their stuff works, they don't need a gig. And what I'm seeing, most of the fiber companies we look at, $70 a month is the buy-in, and a gig is going to run around $100 a month. So the other side of it is, I'm not going to go out and swap out my entire fixed wireless network out there that does 100 down, 20 up. As people want faster speeds, we're going to upgrade them. But the ones that don't care, we're probably going to end up offering $100 or a $49.95 100 meg package. I would say probably within the next 12 to 18 months, that's going to be the only package we offer on that system. And that's $0 home pass, because it's already there. So we'll probably end up moving anybody that wants over 100 meg to Tirana, Tachyon, or fiber, and just keep that as our low cost. And that's how we're going to try and compete, I think, with everything else. So,
Sasha?
Yeah.
Okay,
I was going to say,
Kim.
for me, that's funny that you're seeing that, because we are seeing a huge uptick in the 2.5 and 10 gig people choosing those speeds when they have an offering for 250 symmetrical and 1 gig symmetrical. So, I mean, we're having a call of how much more 10 gig gear can we buy, and how quickly can we get it in, because we're seeing that uptake.
Do you ever do an analysis, Kim, to see what they're peaking at? I mean, I'm really curious how many people are running that, on a system where the WAN port on their router is, as a gig anyway.
That's an interesting point, because when we offered the 2.5, you're just like, how many people really even understand the technology and how to utilize the 10 and 2.5 gig speeds? But at the end of the day, we believe it's a consumer choice, even if they're using it or not using it, that they get to the ability to get the speeds that they want. Because I am very much shocked. I think for the next week's installs, we have over 60 coming up for either upgrades or whatnot of 2.5 and 10 gig in just 1 week. So
go ahead.
It's just interesting to see it in different markets and what people are experiencing in different markets.
Well,
so
sorry, go ahead. Can I go first?
Sure. I was just going to say that, you've done so much for me, and I just want to remind you that there's still more that you could do for me. You're going to find me a demo unit so I can get off of my 1 gig LAN and get into a faster one. So I just want to remind you of that in front of everyone.
You reminding Sasha that, or me?
No, you, Travis.
Yeah. Yes. I bought you lunch today, isn't that good?
I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's never enough. I'm just gonna keep.
Well,
I'm
okay,
the mouse with a cookie. Go ahead.
Here's the dirty little secret, and maybe this isn't a secret, or maybe it isn't even that dirty, but a 2.5 gig product, anything $149 or less, I'm convinced that a lot of these work from home companies give $150 a month for connectivity per diem. So all they do is they go on the website and they say, what's the best thing I can get for $150, and they buy it. Because we're in the same boat Kim's in. We're 100 times more 2.5 gig connections this year than I budgeted for, because I think it's just the price point. But that being said, the reality, I was up in northern Minnesota this weekend between nowhere and nothing, and I was on Starlink for 4 days straight. Awesome. So I'm just telling you, let's not disqualify wireless everywhere, but in the city here, fiber, underground, I sleep good at night. There's no Doug Dawson problems here. So
Sasha?
Oh, I just had a question for Max. I was curious if you've gone through. Are you using the 60 gigahertz links for the tachyon stuff?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is any tower that we're putting the tachyon has to have at least a gigabit backhaul.
Yeah.
And we're kind of trying to get to 10 gig.
Yeah.
So that's
have you gone through a winter with the winter snowstorms? Because we have seen, like, as these, higher frequencies, they have the opposite of the spring effect, right? So you put 2.4 or 2.45 up in the fall, and then the next spring it all goes down. With the higher range ones, it's the opposite. When the snow comes, it all goes down. And I'm curious.
Yeah, we've been running sick loose for like 5 years.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say we haven't had issues with it, but when everything's properly engineered, everything tends to be good. But if something moves a little bit on a tower, then we have to try and be pretty proactive about going out to fix it if we see like a degradation in signal. The other side is we always have almost everywhere on our network we have secondary connections. So like the cycler that feeds my tower, the backup is a ubiquity wave point to point going to a fiber connection 5 miles away, or not 5, but a couple miles away in a different direction. Gotcha. So if the cycler drops, it switches over to the other one. So we built our entire network to have that amount of redundancy. They're so inexpensive. I mean, literally, when you look at like a point-to-point cycler, if you're buying it right, it's probably going to be in the like $5,000-$6,000 range. So just get another one and make sure, or use some other type of technology, license links to back it up. We try to do that for all of our towers.
That's awesome.
Travis, you celebrated that?
Well, I just think that this is a good opportunity to ask Matt, how does he feel about the 6 gigahertz spectrum?
Oh, hey, any spectrum that's out there is great to have. And our initial forays into it, we've tried the Cambium product in 6 gig. That was the first stuff we put up. We found that it doesn't scale up quite like we want. There's going to be good places to use it because it doesn't take a ton of power. But probably 15 or 20 people on an AP is about all you're going to get out of it. And the range is a lot less than we were hoping. It's probably like 3 to 4 mile. The Tirana 6 gig, however, that's probably an 8 to 10 mile. And we've seen gigabit speed tests off of it. And we've seen, I've talked to people who have 200 people on a Tirana base node and nobody having issues. So it's a completely different, it kind of exists in a world of its own, both in performance, but unfortunately also in price and power consumption, because it takes so much power compared to most of the other stuff we run that you really have to have a pretty beefy setup in order to get full use out of it.
Yeah, it's actually, I heard that on a secret show that they're Bitcoin miners. This is all a shell game. It's all faked, and they're just using all that power to mine Bitcoins.
So let's not just lose sight of how amazing that 6 gigahertz spectrum is, right?
Yes,
really,
Travis, we all love Ajit Pai. May he live.
I want to talk about the Trump's FCC and how effective they were to get that, that 6 gigahertz passed and out in production. So guys like Matt and I can run it and actually do more good than the bead did. So
if we weren't out of time,
I had no idea that Travis loved Ajit Pai so much. I mean, this is the first time I've ever
remember
heard this.
I've always told you I'm a resultatarian, and that is some
No,
serious
if you were a resultatarian, you would actually have a lot of deeply conflicted feelings about Ajit Pai.
Okay, you started the whole day by telling me you're not a max taxologist, so and I'm a resultatarian.
I'm just telling you, you cannot sit there and be frustrated with BEAD without looking back at the ways in which BEAD is failing because Ajit Pai refused to actually do a bunch of things that he was supposed to do. He got he got 2 or 3 things done that were good. He didn't get a bunch of other things done. And then you come in here and you give me a high blood pressure week after week by bringing him up. If we had more time, I'd put a quarter in Sasha, though.
FCCs that have ever walked our land. So
I was just going to say, if I had more time, I'd put a quarter in Sasha and just ask him to go off on all of the recent FCCs.
The only issue I have with 6 gigahertz, and Matt, you might agree, is I think we should have power that's similar to Uni 3 and not this low 30 EIRP. But if we could fix that, if we could get up to like a 50, maybe even higher EIRP, now we'll be cooking with gas. So.
Travis, we don't cook with gas anymore now. We cook with induction stoves, so you got to update your idioms.
Sorry, I'm still Googling all the words Sasha said, so these are my words of the day. So,
well, I really appreciate Matt, you coming back. Look forward to not having quite as much time before you get back on again, and Sasha likewise. Really appreciate you guys stepping in.
Absolutely, this is fun.
Yay! Go team.
Rye messaged me, and I wanted to note that for those of you who at the beginning discussion and talking about frustrations with government, I would say if you're interested in this, for a take that you never hear almost anywhere, a book that I loved and Rye reminded me of is a book by David Graeber called Utopia of Rules. And it is a critique of all these government programs that is unlike what you normally hear on mass media. When it's really well thought out, and I loved it. In fact, I think I gave it to Rye as a gift at some point. So kudos to Rye.
Go to Ruben's.
Yeah, I like Ruben's gifts more than Chris's gifts to give me a book about government.
There's no one here that's surprised by this.
My man. Thank you, Ruben.
Well, Chris, yes. I want to shout out to you. You gave me the recommendation, I think, on one of these about Barry Lynn and Freedom from All Masters, and wow, that was fantastic book. Thanks for that recommendation. I actually finished reading it when I was on a lobbying trip to Washington, D.C., and it was like I thought I was in the middle of the singularity for a second. But thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say while I'm up on this soapbox briefly that between that and then also there's a book by Zephyr Teachout called was it Ben Franklin's Snuff Box or something like that, Sasha?
Yeah, it's something weird. I don't remember what it is.
But exactly. Zephyr Teachout doesn't have a lot of books. Yeah. If you want to look it up, you'll find it. And it's about the way the founders really spend more time trying to root out corruption. And, in a time in which we have a former president on numerous trials, the New York City mayor was just indicted, I think is the correct term, or like it's about to be, whatever it is. Like, I think we're heading into a new era of corruption of officials, particularly as we lose news media that is looking into them. And one of the things I find fascinating, looking back at that book that Matt just mentioned, and the other one is, there's a whole history of like the way that the people that set up this country did it to distribute power and prevent it from being centralized by either government or by private corporations, and also insulating us against the power of others from other countries that might want to try to influence things. The People's Republic of China has a lot of money to like be able to try to influence U.S. elections if they were allowed to do it. And so I'm not here to say like vote one party or another, although I did vote today. But I will say that it is worth going back and trying to get a sense of how we have this system that we've had, how it's lasted for so long without being corrupted more than it is. And there's a lot of interesting stuff out there to get a better sense of. Yeah,
and Barry Lynn has the cover story in Harper's this month. So if you want a little bit of fan fiction, there you have it. It's a good essay on AI and antitrust that's worth pointing your cursor at.
Yeah. So, liberty for all. Let's keep working toward that. Great internet access and liberty for all. It's been another fun episode of Connect This.